Commander Zektar stood in front of the big screen that showed planet Earth spinning slowly in space. The blue and green world looked small and weak to him. His 4 arms were crossed and his yellow eyes showed nothing but disgust. This was the newest planet to join the Galactic Defense Coalition, and Zektar already knew it was a mistake. "Look at these humans," he said to his helper, Lieutenant Mordak. "They are soft and weak. They use old weapons that shoot metal bullets. They try to save their enemies instead of killing them. And the worst thing of all, they care too much about their friends." Zektar was famous across the galaxy. Other aliens called him the Iron Claw of Vorthak. He had won many battles and never backed down from a fight. His most famous victory was at Kepler 442b, where he fought against the bug-like Hive Collective for 6 months. While other commanders failed, Zektar found a way to win. The Vorthak people were natural warriors. They had thick gray skin like armor, 4 strong arms, and sharp claws. They never showed fear or weakness. To them, war was simple. You killed your enemies before they killed you. You never wasted time or resources on the weak. Victory was everything, but humans were different, and this made Zektar angry. He had read their military reports. Human soldiers would risk their lives to save wounded friends. Human commanders would change their battle plans just to save a few lives. Human armies would even die protecting people who could not fight. "It makes no sense," Zektar told Mordak as they walked through the ship's corridors. "A good warrior thinks only of winning. These humans think about feelings and friendship. How can such weak creatures help us fight the Hive Collective?" Mordak nodded in agreement. He had served under Zektar for many years and knew better than to disagree. "Perhaps they will learn from us, Commander. We can teach them to be stronger." "I doubt it," Zektar replied. "Weakness is in their nature. They cannot change what they are." The first time Zektar met human soldiers was during a joint mission near Proxima Centauri. The Hive Collective had sent scout ships to test the Coalition's defenses. Zektar was put in charge of the mission, with human forces supporting his attack. Captain Jake Morrison was the leader of the human Marines. He was a tall man with brown hair and serious blue eyes. When Zektar explained his battle plan, Morrison raised his hand to speak. "Sir, I have a suggestion," Morrison said politely. "Instead of attacking them head-on, we could go around through the asteroid field. We would lose fewer ships and still win the battle." Zektar's eyes became thin slits. He stared at the human captain with growing anger. "Captain Morrison, we win battles by being strong and making sacrifices. Your people worry too much about saving every single life. This is why you will never be real warriors." Morrison said nothing more, but Zektar saw something in the human's eyes. It was not fear or shame. It looked like quiet strength, the kind that came from deep beliefs, but Zektar thought it was just foolish thinking. The battle went as Zektar planned. His ships attacked the Hive scouts directly, destroying them quickly. But the cost was high. 3 coalition ships were destroyed, and many good soldiers died. Morrison's plan might have saved those lives, but Zektar did not care. Victory was what mattered. After the battle, Morrison approached Zektar again. "Commander, we won the fight, but we lost good people. Next time maybe we could try a different way." "There is only one way to fight," Zektar replied coldly. "The strong survive, and the weak die. Your species needs to learn this truth if you want to survive in this galaxy." But Morrison did not look convinced. "We believe every life has value, Commander. That belief makes us fight harder, not weaker." Zektar laughed, a harsh sound that echoed through the ship's hangar. "You will learn, Captain. When the real war comes, your soft hearts will get you all killed." In the days after the Proxima mission, Zektar continued to study human military records. What he found only made him more disgusted. There were stories of human soldiers who died protecting civilians, reports of commanders who chose retreat instead of victory to save their troops, files about something humans called war crimes, rules about how to treat enemies fairly. "They even have rules about being nice to their enemies," Zektar told Mordak one evening. "How can you win a war if you worry about being fair to the people trying to kill you?" The more he learned about humans, the more Zektar believed they were hopeless. Their history was full of wars where they fought each other instead of working together. They had weapons that could destroy their whole planet, but they were afraid to use them. They made laws about protecting the weak and helping the poor. They are not warriors, Zektar decided. They are farmers and builders who sometimes pick up weapons. When the real fighting begins, they will run away or surrender. But even as he said these words, something bothered him about the humans. In every battle report, even when they lost, human soldiers kept fighting until the end. When their ships were damaged, they stayed at their posts. When their friends were hurt, they risked everything to help them. Zektar tried to understand this. In Vorthak culture, a wounded warrior was left behind so the healthy ones could keep fighting. It was practical and efficient. But humans did the opposite. They slowed down their whole army to carry one injured soldier. Perhaps, Mordak suggested carefully, their way of fighting works for them, even if we do not understand it. No, Zektar said firmly. There is only one way to win wars. Be stronger than your enemy and kill them before they kill you. Everything else is weakness and will lead to defeat. 3 weeks after the Proxima mission, Zektar received new orders from Coalition Command. He was told to observe and judge how well humans could fight. The test would be special, using advanced simulation technology to recreate a famous human battle from their history. The battle was called Stalingrad. Zektar had never heard of it before, but the humans seemed proud of it. When he read the basic facts, he almost laughed out loud. Over 1 million soldiers had died fighting for control of a single city. The battle lasted for months in freezing, cold weather. Both sides lost huge numbers of troops. This is their greatest military success? Zektar asked his aide. A battle where they wasted 1 million lives fighting over one city? It seems inefficient, Mordak agreed. Perhaps they want to show us how not to fight. But the humans were serious about the demonstration. Colonel Dan Parker and Major Lisa Cohen would lead the simulation and explain what happened. They seemed excited to share this piece of their history with their alien allies. Commander Zektar, Colonel Parker said when they met, we think this battle will help you understand how humans approach warfare. Stalingrad was one of the most important battles in our history. I am sure it was educational, Zektar replied with barely hidden mockery. I look forward to seeing how your species managed to waste so many lives in one place. Major Cohen stepped forward. She was a small woman with red hair and green eyes, but she spoke with confidence. Commander, I think you might be surprised by what you learn. This battle showed the best of human nature under the worst possible conditions. Zektar doubted that, but he was curious. The simulation technology was advanced enough to let him experience the battle as if he had been there. He would see through the eyes of a human soldier and feel what they felt. It would be the perfect way to prove that human military thinking was flawed. Very well, he said. Show me this great battle of yours. But do not expect me to be impressed by mass death and wasted resources. As the simulation prepared to begin, Zektar felt confident. He had studied war for his entire life. He knew what made armies strong and what made them weak. Soon, he would have proof that human military doctrine was based on emotion rather than logic. He had no idea that everything he believed about strength and weakness was about to change forever. The simulation room was unlike anything Zektar had seen before. The walls were covered with screens and sensors that could read his thoughts and emotions. In the center was a chair that looked more like a medical device than furniture. Wires and neural connectors hung from the ceiling like metal vines. This technology will let you experience the battle as if you were really there, Colonel Parker explained. You will see through the eyes of a Soviet officer named Lieutenant Pavel Kozlov. You will feel what he felt, but you will still be able to think your own thoughts. Zektar sat in the chair and felt the neural connectors attached to his skull. The sensation was strange, but not painful. How long will this take? He asked. The battle lasted several months, Major Cohen replied. But we can compress time in the simulation. You will experience about 6 hours of real time, but it will feel like weeks of battle. And this will show me human military excellence? Zektar asked with doubt in his voice. It will show you something, Parker said quietly. Whether you call it excellence or not is up to you. The simulation began slowly. At first, Zekatar saw only darkness. Then images began to form in his mind. He was standing in a city, but not a city like any he had seen before. The buildings were broken and burning. Smoke filled the air so thick he could barely breathe. The ground was covered with ice and snow mixed with dirt and blood. "This is Stalingrad in 1942. He heard Major Cohen's voice in his head. "The German army has been trying to capture this city for weeks. The Soviet army is trying to stop them." Zekatar looked around through Pavel's eyes. The human officer was young, maybe 25 years old. He was thin from not eating enough food, and his uniform was torn and dirty. In his hands was a rifle that looked primitive compared to the energy weapons Zekatar was used to. "Why are they fighting for this place?" Zekatar asked. "It is already destroyed. There is nothing left worth saving." "That is what the Germans thought too," Colonel Parker's voice answered. "But the Soviets saw something different. They saw their homeland. They saw the line between freedom and slavery." Around Pavel, other Soviet soldiers were preparing for battle. They were all young men, some barely out of their teenage years. They looked scared but determined. Zekatar could feel Pavel's emotions through the neural link. Fear, yes, but also anger and a strange kind of love for his fellow soldiers. "These soldiers are not well trained," Zekatar observed. "They have little ammunition and poor weapons. Why do they not retreat to a better position?" "Because there is no better position," Major Cohen replied. "This is where they decided to make their stand." The first attack came at dawn. Through Pavel's eyes, Zekatar saw German soldiers advancing through the rubble-filled streets. They moved in good formation with better weapons and more ammunition. By all military logic, they should have won easily. But something strange happened. The Soviet soldiers did not break and run. Instead, they fought from every building, every pile of rocks, every hole in the ground. When one soldier fell, another took his place. When they ran out of bullets, they used bayonets. When their bayonets broke, they threw rocks. Zekatar watched. A young Soviet private named Ivan crawl across 50 meters of open ground under heavy fire. The boy was trying to reach a wounded comrade who was crying for help. Any logical soldier would have left the wounded man and saved himself. "This is wasteful," Zekatar said aloud. "That private will probably die, and then they will have lost 2 soldiers instead of 1. "Watch," Colonel Parker said simply. Ivan reached his wounded friend and began dragging him back to safety. German bullets hit the ground all around them. The private was hit in the leg but kept crawling. Blood ran down his uniform, but he did not let go of his comrade. Other Soviet soldiers began shooting at the Germans to cover Ivan's retreat. They exposed themselves to enemy fire just to help one private save one wounded man. It made no tactical sense, but somehow it worked. Ivan got his friend to safety and both of them lived. "I do not understand," Zekatar said. "They risked many lives to save one. This is not efficient." "Efficiency is not everything," Major Cohen replied. "Sometimes the most important battles are not about numbers." As the simulation continued, Zekatar saw more things that confused him. Soviet soldiers shared their small amounts of food with wounded German prisoners. Russian officers changed their attack plans to avoid hitting buildings where civilians were hiding. Entire squads volunteered for missions they knew would probably kill them. The worst example was the grain elevator. 13 Soviet soldiers were ordered to hold a tall building that stored grain. The building had no real military value, but it gave a good view of the surrounding area. The Germans wanted to capture it and the Soviets wanted to keep it. Zekatar watched through Pavel's eyes as the 13 men prepared to defend the building. They had very little ammunition, not much food, and no way to get help if they were attacked. Their sergeant was a man named Alexei Petrov, who looked more like a farmer than a soldier. "This is suicide," Zekatar said. "They should abandon this position and fall back to the main defensive line." "They could," Colonel Parker agreed. "But every hour they hold that building is another hour for the city's defenders to prepare for the next German attack." The battle for the grain elevator lasted 3 days. Zekatar experienced every hour of it through Pavel's consciousness. He felt the cold wind blowing through broken windows. He tasted the dust and smoke that filled the air. He heard the constant sound of gunfire and explosions. The German attacks came in waves. First, they tried to take the building quickly with a small force. When that failed, they brought more soldiers. When that failed, they brought tanks and artillery. The 13 Soviet defenders fought from every floor, every room, every corner. On the second day, only 7 defenders were still alive. Sergeant Petrov had been wounded in the chest but continued to give orders. The men were running out of ammunition and had not eaten in 2 days. But they did not surrender. Why do they not give up? Zektar asked. They have done their duty. No one would blame them for surrendering now. Because they are not fighting for duty, Major Cohen said. They are fighting for each other. Zektar watched as the wounded sergeant crawled from room to room checking on his men. He shared his water with a private who had a fever. He told jokes to keep their spirits up. When the youngest soldier, a boy named Dmitri, began to cry from fear, Petrov held him like a father. In my village, Petrov told the boy, we have a saying. A man is not measured by how long he lives, but by what he dies for. We are dying for something good, Dmitri. We are dying so that other people can live free. On the third day, only 3 defenders remained alive. Petrov could barely stand, but he still commanded his position. The Germans made their final attack with overwhelming force. As enemy soldiers poured into the building, the sergeant made a decision that shocked Zektar. Instead of using his last grenade to kill Germans, Petrov used it to collapse part of the building. The explosion blocked the main entrance and created a pile of rubble that would slow down the German advance. It was his final act of defiance, and it cost him his life. He wasted his last weapon, Zektar said, but his voice was not as sure as before. He could have killed several enemies with that grenade. He did something better, Colonel Parker replied. He bought his city a few more minutes to prepare. Those few minutes might save hundreds of lives. As the simulation moved forward, Zektar began to notice something strange. Even though the Soviet soldiers were losing individual battles, they were not really losing the war. Every German victory cost them dearly. Every building they captured was paid for with blood and time. The Germans were better trained and better equipped, but they were fighting an enemy that would not break. The Soviets turned every street into a battlefield, every building into a fortress. They made the Germans pay for every meter of ground. This is not how war should work, Zektar said. The stronger force should win quickly and easily. That is true when you are only fighting soldiers, Major Cohen said. But the Germans were not just fighting soldiers. They were fighting an idea. They were fighting people who believed their cause was worth dying for. Through Pavel's eyes, Zektar saw Soviet soldiers writing letters to their families before going into battle. He saw them sharing stories about their homes and their dreams. He saw them praying even though their government did not allow religion. He saw them being human in the middle of hell. And slowly, something began to change in Zektar's mind. These soldiers were not weak. They were afraid, yes, but they fought anyway. They were outnumbered and outgunned, but they did not give up. They cared about each other. And somehow that made them stronger, not weaker. I need to see more, Zektar said quietly. I need to understand what is happening here. There is much more to see, Colonel Parker replied. The Battle of Stalingrad lasted for months. This is only the beginning. As the simulation continued, Zektar prepared himself for what he thought would be more examples of human weakness and waste. But something deep in his mind whispered that he might be wrong about these strange creatures called humans. Something told him that he was about to learn a lesson that would change everything he believed about war and strength. The simulation moved deeper into the battle, and Zektar found himself experiencing things that made no sense to his warrior mind. Through Pavel's eyes, he watched Soviet soldiers do things that went against everything he had learned about warfare. Group of Russian soldiers found 3 wounded German prisoners in a bombed building. The Germans were badly hurt and could not fight anymore. In Vorthak military thinking, wounded enemies should be left to die or killed quickly to save resources. But the Soviet soldiers did something different. They shared their small supply of medical bandages with the German wounded. They gave them water from their own canteens. One Russian soldier, a medic named Boris, spent an hour treating a German boy who could not have been older than 18. "This makes no sense," Zektar said through the neural link. "These Germans were trying to kill them yesterday. Why waste medical supplies on enemies?" "Because they see them as people first, enemies second," Major Cohen replied. "Even in war, humans try to hold on to their humanity." Zektar felt Pavel's thoughts and emotions as he watched the medic work. The Soviet officer was thinking about his own younger brother back home. The wounded German boy reminded him of that brother. Pavel felt sadness for the enemy soldier, not hatred. "Your species is strange," Zektar muttered. "In battle there should be only two types of beings, those on your side and those you must kill. Is that how the Vorthak see war?" Colonel Parker asked. "Of course. It is the only logical way. Emotions make soldiers weak and get them killed." But as the simulation continued, Zektar began to see that emotions did not always make the human soldiers weak. Sometimes emotions made them do impossible things. He watched a Soviet captain named Nikolai lead a charge against German machine gun positions. The attack should have failed. The Germans had better weapons and a strong defensive position. But Nikolai did not charge because of military strategy. He charged because he had just received news that his wife and daughter had been killed in a bombing raid on his hometown. The captain's anger and grief turned him into something beyond a normal soldier. He ran straight at the German guns, roaring like a wild animal. His men followed him not because they were ordered to, but because they felt his pain and wanted to help him get revenge. The charge succeeded. The German position was overrun, and an important road was cleared for Soviet reinforcements. But Captain Nikolai died in the attack, cut down by machine gun fire just meters from his goal. "He threw his life away for nothing," Zektar said. "His anger made him careless, and now he is dead." "But his sacrifice opened the road," Major Cohen pointed out. "Hundreds of reinforcements got through because of what he did. His death had meaning." "Death in battle always has meaning if it leads to victory," Zektar replied. "But he could have achieved the same result with better tactics and stayed alive." "Maybe," Colonel Parker said. "But would those better tactics have inspired his men, the way his sacrifice did? Sometimes leadership is not about staying alive. Sometimes it is about showing others what you are willing to die for." The simulation moved forward in time, and Zektar experienced the battle from different perspectives. He saw through the eyes of a German officer named Friedrich, who was beginning to doubt whether this war was right. He experienced the thoughts of a Soviet sniper named Katya, who had learned to kill efficiently but still cried for every enemy soldier she shot. But it was the story of factory worker Nina that truly confused Zektar. Nina worked in a weapons factory inside the city. Even as German bombs fell around the building and enemy soldiers fought in the streets outside, she continued to make ammunition for Soviet guns. "This woman should evacuate," Zektar observed. "She is not a soldier. Why does she stay in such a dangerous place?" Through the simulation, he felt Nina's thoughts. She was afraid, terrified actually. Every explosion made her jump. Every sound of gunfire made her hands shake. But she stayed at her machine, making bullets and artillery shells because she knew the soldiers needed them. "My husband is fighting, somewhere out there," Nina thought to herself as she worked. "My son is in the army too. Every bullet I make might save their lives, or the life of someone else's husband and son." She worked 18 hours a day with very little food or sleep. When a German bomb damaged part of the factory, she helped repair it. When other workers became too sick or scared to continue, she took over their machines too. "This is not logical," Zektar said. "She has no military training. She could leave the city and be safe. Why does she risk her life for strangers?" "Because they are not strangers to her," Major Cohen explained. "In her mind, every Soviet soldier is her son, her husband, her brother. She fights the only way she can." The most shocking moment came when Zektar experienced a memory through Pavel's eyes. The Soviet officer was trapped in a building with 5 other soldiers. German troops surrounded them and there was no way to escape. They had very little ammunition left and no food. The youngest soldier in the group was a boy named Yuri, who was only 17 years old. He had been in the army for less than 2 months. As enemy fire kept them pinned down, Yuri began to panic. "I want to go home," the boy cried. "I want to see my mother again. I do not want to die here." Instead of telling the boy to be brave or to stop crying, Pavel put his arm around Yuri's shoulders. The other soldiers gathered around them. For a few minutes, they did not talk about fighting or dying. They talked about home. Sergeant Volkov, an older man with gray hair, told stories about his farm and his cows. Private Dmitri described his girlfriend's smile and how she laughed at his jokes. Pavel talked about the books he wanted to write after the war. "We are all scared, Yuri," Pavel said gently. "But we are scared together. That makes us stronger than our fear." The boy stopped crying and nodded. When the German attack came an hour later, Yuri fought as bravely as any veteran soldier. He died holding his position, but he died as part of a family of warriors who cared about each other. They wasted time on comfort and emotions, Zektar said, but his voice was not as certain as before. They should have used that time to plan their defense. Their defense was not just about bullets and walls, Colonel Parker said. It was about keeping their spirit strong. A soldier who believes he is fighting alone will break easily. A soldier who knows his brothers care about him will fight until his last breath. The simulation showed Zektar a conversation between 2 enemy soldiers that made his understanding of war shift even more. A Soviet sergeant named Alexei was badly wounded and hiding in a basement. A German corporal named Hans found him there, also wounded and unable to fight. Both men were dying slowly from their injuries. They could have tried to kill each other, but they were too weak and tired for more violence. Instead, they began to talk. "I have a wife named Greta," Hans said in broken Russian, showing a crumpled photograph. "She is having a baby soon. I might never see my child." Alexei pulled out a letter from his pocket. "My son Peter is 8 years old. He thinks I am a hero, but I am just scared and want to go home." The 2 enemies talked about their families, their dreams, their fears. They shared water from a broken pipe and helped each other bandage their wounds. For a few hours, they were not German and Soviet. They were just 2 men who wanted to live. When other soldiers found them the next morning, both were unconscious, from blood loss. The German was found by Soviet troops and the Russian was found by Germans. Each side prepared to execute the enemy prisoner. But something strange happened. Hans, using his last bit of strength, claimed that Alexei was under his protection as a prisoner of war. Alexei did the same for Hans when the Soviet soldiers arrived. Each man used his final moments of consciousness to save his enemy's life. Both soldiers died that afternoon, but not before making sure their former enemy would be treated with respect and dignity. "This makes no sense at all," Zektar said, and, for the first time, his voice showed confusion instead of certainty. They were enemies. They should have hated each other. "They were enemies because of politics and nations," Major Cohen said softly. "But they were also both fathers, both husbands, both men who missed their homes. In their final moments, they chose to see each other as human beings." Zektar felt strange sensations he had never experienced before. His throat felt tight, and moisture gathered in his eyes. These were not normal Vorthak reactions. His people did not cry or feel sadness for enemies. "What is happening to me, Or?" he asked. "You are learning empathy," Colonel Parker replied. "You are beginning to understand what it means to see the universe through someone else's eyes." The simulation continued, showing more and more examples of human behavior that challenged everything Zektar believed. He saw Soviet generals making decisions that put the safety of their soldiers above strategic advantage. He witnessed German officers disobeying orders that would have harmed civilians. He experienced moments of unexpected kindness in the middle of the worst battle in human history. Each scene built upon the last, slowly breaking down the wall of certainty that Zektar had built around his understanding of warfare. These humans were not weak. They were not foolish. They were something he had never encountered before, warriors who fought not just with weapons, but with love, hope, and an unshakable belief that some things were worth dying for. The simulation moved into the coldest part of winter. and Zektar felt the bitter cold through Pavel's body. The temperature was so low that weapons froze and would not work. Soldiers on both sides suffered from frostbite and hunger. Many died, not from bullets, but from the cold and lack of food. Through Pavel's eyes, Zektar watched Soviet soldiers doing things that seemed impossible. They shared their thin soup with men who were too weak to find food. They took off their own coats to cover wounded comrades, even though this meant they would freeze themselves. They sang songs together in the dark, frozen bunkers to keep their spirits alive. "This is madness," Zektar said. "They are making themselves weaker to help others. In this cold, every person should save their own strength." "Watch what happens," Colonel Parker said quietly. Zektar saw a Soviet squad led by Sergeant Petrov's replacement, a young man named Victor. The squad had been given an impossible mission: capture a German machine gun position that controlled an important crossroad. The position was well defended with thick concrete walls and plenty of ammunition. Victor's squad had 12 men, but 3 were already wounded and could barely walk. The logical thing would be to leave the wounded behind or send them to the rear. Instead, Victor made a different choice. "We all go together or we do not go at all," he told his men. "We are not just soldiers in the same squad. We are brothers." The attack should have failed completely. The wounded men slowed everyone down. They made noise that should have alerted the German defenders. They used up medical supplies and extra food. By every military rule Zektar knew, Victor had made a terrible mistake. But something unexpected happened. The wounded soldiers, grateful for their squad's loyalty, fought with incredible determination. Private Maxim, who could barely stand because of a leg wound, crawled through enemy fire to plant explosives. Corporal Ivan, suffering from severe frostbite, used his last strength to provide covering fire for his healthy comrades. The attack succeeded. The German position was captured, and the crossroad was opened for Soviet reinforcements. But more importantly, not a single member of Victor's squad was left behind. They had fought as a family and won as a family. "I do not understand how this worked," Zektar admitted. "By all logic, the wounded soldiers should have made the mission fail." "Logic is not everything," Major Cohen replied. "Sometimes faith and loyalty create their own kind of strength." The simulation showed Zektar another scene that shook his beliefs even more. A group of German soldiers had been surrounded by Soviet forces and cut off from their main army. They were starving and nearly frozen. Their commander, Colonel Friedrich Paulus, faced an impossible choice. He could order his men to fight to the death, which was what German military doctrine demanded, or he could surrender and save their lives, which would be seen as cowardice and failure. Zektar watched through the eyes of a German radio operator as Paulus struggled with this decision. "My duty is to follow orders and never surrender," Paulus said to his officers. "But my soldiers are dying of cold and hunger. What is my duty to them?" Through the neural link, Zektar felt the German colonel's pain. Paulus was not a weak man or a coward. He was a career soldier who had won many battles. But he was also a human being who cared about the men under his command. "In Vorthak military law, there is no choice," Zektar said. "A commander fights until death or victory. Personal feelings do not matter." "But what if personal feelings make you a better commander?" Colonel Parker asked. "What if caring about your soldiers makes you stronger, not weaker?" Zektar watched as Paulus made his final decision. He chose to surrender, knowing it would destroy his reputation and probably cost him his life. But he could not watch his men die slowly in the frozen ruins when surrender might save them. "I cannot ask them to die for nothing," Paulus said quietly. "A good commander knows when to fight and when to stop fighting." The surrender scene was unlike anything Zektar had ever witnessed. Instead of the shame and humiliation he expected, there was something that looked almost like relief. German soldiers who had been enemies with the Soviets for months began sharing what little food they had. Soviet medics treated German wounded without being ordered to do so. "They are helping their former enemies," Zektar observed with wonder. "The fighting is over, so now they see each other as just people who need help." "War does not have to destroy everything human in us," Major Cohen said. Even in the worst conditions, people can choose to be kind. The simulation then showed Zektar, the aftermath of the battle from the Soviet perspective. General Vasily Chuikov, the Soviet commander, was meeting with his officers to plan the next phase of the war. But instead of immediately moving to new battles, Chuikov was focused on caring for his soldiers. "How many of our men are wounded?" Chuikov asked his medical officer. "Nearly half the army needs some kind of medical treatment, sir. Many are suffering from frostbite, malnutrition, and exhaustion." "Then we rest," Chuikov decided. "We take time to heal our people before we ask them to fight again." One of his younger officers spoke up. "Sir, we could press our advantage now while the Germans are retreating. We could win more territory quickly." Chuikov looked at the young man with patient eyes. "Lieutenant, what good is territory if we lose the men who must defend it? Our soldiers have given us everything they have. Now we must give them what they need to recover." This decision made no sense to Zektar's military training. When an enemy was retreating, the logical thing was to pursue them immediately and destroy them completely. Stopping to care for wounded soldiers gave the enemy time to regroup and prepare new defenses. "This general is making a strategic mistake," Zektar said. "He is letting emotion override military logic." "Is he?" Colonel Parker asked. "Let's see what happens next." The simulation moved forward several weeks. Zektar watched as the Soviet soldiers recovered their strength under Chuikov's careful leadership. They received medical treatment, hot food, and time to rest. More importantly, they received recognition for their sacrifice and courage. Then, the army was ready to fight again. Something remarkable had happened. The soldiers were not just physically stronger than before. They were emotionally stronger too. They trusted their commanders completely, because they knew those commanders cared about their lives. They fought with incredible determination because they believed their cause was just. The next battle was a complete victory. The German forces, who had not received the same care and rest, were defeated quickly and decisively. Chuikov's decision to rest his army had actually made them more effective fighters, not weaker ones. "I was wrong about the general," Zektar admitted quietly. His care for his soldiers made them fight better, not worse. "Now you are beginning to understand," Major Cohen said. "Human strength does not come from being hard and emotionless. It comes from caring about something bigger than yourself." The simulation showed Zektar one final scene that completed his transformation. A young Soviet soldier named Dmitry was writing a letter to his mother just before the final battle of Stalingrad. Through Pavel's eyes, Zektar read the letter over the boy's shoulder. "Dear Mama," Dmitry wrote, "I do not know if I will survive tomorrow's battle. I am scared, but I am also proud. I have learned that being brave does not mean you are not afraid. It means you do what is right even when you are afraid. I have seen men die for their friends, give their food to hungry enemies, and choose kindness when they could choose hatred. If I die tomorrow, I die knowing that humans can be good even in the worst times. I love you, Mama. Tell Papa I tried to be the man he taught me to be." Tears were flowing down Zektar's face now, though he did not understand why. The Vorthak did not cry, especially not for strangers from another species. But something about Dmitry's letter had broken through all his defenses and touched something deep in his heart. "What is happening to me?" he asked, his voice shaking. "You are feeling what it means to be human," Colonel Parker replied gently. "You are understanding that strength and weakness are not what you thought they were." The simulation began to fade, but the emotions it had awakened in Zektar continued to grow stronger. He had entered the Battle of Stalingrad believing that humans were weak and foolish. He was leaving it with the knowledge that they possessed a kind of strength he had never imagined possible. "I need time to think about what I have seen," Zektar said as the neural connectors were removed from his head. "Everything I believed about warfare and strength has been challenged." "Take all the time you need," Major Cohen said. "The most important battles we fight are often the ones inside our own minds." As Zektar left the simulation room, his mind was spinning with new ideas and feelings. The humans had not just shown him a battle. They had shown him a different way of looking at life itself. and for the first time in his long military career, the iron claw of Vorthak was beginning to wonder if there might be something better than iron. Zektar sat alone in his quarters for 3 days after the simulation ended. He did not eat much or speak to anyone. His mind kept returning to the images he had seen and the emotions he had felt. The Battle of Stalingrad had changed something deep inside him, but he was not sure what it meant for his future. Lieutenant Mordak came to check on his commander several times. He was worried because Zektar had never acted this way before. The Iron Claw of Vorthak was known for making quick decisions and moving forward without doubt, but now he seemed lost in thought. "Sir, are you well?" Mordak asked on the 3rd day. "The other officers are asking about you." Zektar looked up at his aide with eyes that seemed different somehow. They were softer than before, more thoughtful. "I am thinking, Mordak. For the first time in my life, I am really thinking about what it means to be a warrior. The humans have confused you with their strange ways," Mordak said. "You should forget about their simulation and return to proper Vorthak military thinking." "No," Zektar said quietly. "The humans have not confused me. They have shown me something I never knew existed. They have shown me that there is more than one way to be strong." Before Mordak could respond, an urgent message came through the ship's communication system. Coalition Command was calling all senior officers to an emergency meeting. A large Hive collective fleet had been discovered heading toward the Wolf 359 system, where several human colonies were located. "This is our chance to test what we have learned," Zektar said as he stood up from his chair. "We will see if human military ideas work in real battle." The meeting was held on the Coalition flagship, a massive ship that represented all the different species in the Alliance. Zektar found himself sitting next to Colonel Parker and Major Cohen, the same humans who had shown him the Stalingrad simulation. Admiral Krex, a Vorthak like Zektar but from a different clan, was in charge of the mission. He laid out the situation in typical Vorthak style, direct, efficient, and focused only on destroying the enemy. "The Hive fleet has 60 ships," Admiral Krex announced. "We have 45. They are stronger, but we can win if we attack quickly and use our best weapons immediately. I propose a direct assault on their main battle group." The other Vorthak commanders nodded in agreement. This was how they always fought: find the enemy, attack with maximum force, and accept whatever casualties were necessary for victory. But Zektar raised one of his 4 hands to speak. "Admiral, I request permission to suggest an alternative strategy." The room fell silent. Everyone knew that Zektar never questioned attack plans. He was famous for his aggressive tactics and willingness to accept high casualties for quick victories. "Speak, Commander," Admiral Krex said with surprise in his voice. "The Hive fleet is heading for human colonies," Zektar began. "Their goal is not just military victory. They want to capture civilians to use as slaves and food. If we attack them directly, some of their ships will break through our lines and reach the colonies." "That is acceptable," Admiral Krex replied. "Some civilian casualties are expected in war. Our job is to destroy the enemy fleet, not to protect every individual human." "But what if we could do both?" Zektar asked. "What if we could destroy the enemy and save the civilians?" Colonel Parker leaned forward with interest. "What do you have in mind, Commander?" Zektar stood up and walked to the holographic display that showed the Wolf 359 system. "Instead of attacking the Hive fleet directly, we divide our forces. Half of our ships will engage the enemy in obvious battle. The other half will use stealth technology to position themselves between the Hive fleet and the colonies. That will weaken our attack force," Admiral Krex objected. "We need all our ships together to have enough firepower to win." "Not if we fight smarter instead of just harder," Zektar replied. "The humans have taught me that sometimes the strongest strategy is not the most obvious one." Major Cohen smiled. "You want to use the Hive fleet's aggression against them. When they see our main force attacking, they will commit most of their ships to that battle. Then our hidden ships can attack their flanks and cut off their retreat." "Exactly," Zektar said. "And more importantly, none of their ships will reach the colonies. We protect the civilians and destroy the enemy fleet." The debate that followed was intense. Most of the Vorthak commanders thought Zektar's plan was too complicated and risky. They preferred the direct approach that had worked for centuries. But the human officers supported the new strategy, and some of the other alien species began to see its advantages. Admiral Krex finally made his decision. Commander Zektar, you may implement your strategy, but if it fails, you will bear full responsibility for the consequences. I accept that responsibility, Zektar said without hesitation. The battle began 2 days later. Zektar commanded the stealth force, while Admiral Krex led the main attack. As predicted, the Hive fleet responded to the frontal assault by sending most of their ships to engage the visible coalition forces. But something unexpected happened during the battle. The main coalition force, led by Admiral Krex, began to take heavy casualties. The Hive ships were stronger than expected, and the direct assault was failing. Commander Zektar, Admiral Krex's voice came through the communication system. We are being overwhelmed. If you do not attack now, we will be destroyed. This was the moment that would test everything Zektar had learned from the humans. The logical Vorthak response would be to maintain the original plan and let the main force be destroyed if necessary. Victory was more important than casualties. But Zektar thought about the Soviet soldiers at Stalingrad, who had risked everything to save their comrades. He thought about the generals who had chosen to protect their soldiers instead of just winning battles. All stealth ships change course, Zektar commanded. We are going to save our friends. Lieutenant Mordak looked at his commander with shock. Sir, this will ruin our strategic advantage. The Hive ships will detect us immediately. Then, we will fight them in the open, Zektar replied. Better to lose our advantage than to lose our allies. The stealth ships revealed themselves and attacked the Hive fleet from behind. The surprise was complete, and the enemy forces found themselves caught between two coalition attack groups, but the battle was still difficult and costly. During the fighting, Zektar's own ship was badly damaged. His weapon systems failed and his engines were losing power. A Hive battleship was moving in to finish them off. Sir, we should evacuate, Mordak said as explosions shook their bridge. The ship is going to be destroyed. No, Zektar said firmly. We do not abandon our post, and we do not abandon our crew. Instead of evacuating, Zektar ordered his ship to ram the Hive battleship. It was a suicide attack that would destroy both vessels. But just before impact, 3 human ships arrived and destroyed the Hive battleship with coordinated fire. Captain Jake Morrison's voice came over the communication. System. Commander Zektar, are you all right? We saw you were in trouble. Why did you come back for us? Zektar asked. You could have continued attacking other targets. Because you saved our main force, Morrison replied. We do not leave our friends behind. The battle ended in complete victory for the coalition. The Hive fleet was destroyed and not a single enemy ship reached the human colonies. But more importantly, the casualties were much lower than anyone had expected. After the battle, Admiral Krex approached Zektar with a puzzled expression. Your strategy worked, but I do not understand why. By all logic, dividing our forces should have made us weaker. It did make us weaker in firepower, Zektar agreed, but it made us stronger in purpose. When soldiers know they are fighting to protect something they care about, they fight better than when they are just following orders. You sound like a human, Admiral Krex said with some disapproval. Thank you, Zektar replied. I consider that a compliment. In the weeks that followed, Zektar requested a permanent transfer to work with human forces. He studied their military history, their tactics, and their philosophy of warfare. He learned that strength could come from many different sources, and that the strongest armies were those that fought for something bigger than themselves. When other Vorthak commanders criticized him for becoming soft, Zektar would smile and tell them about Stalingrad. He would explain how 13 men had held a grain elevator for 3 days, not because they were ordered to, but because they believed their sacrifice would save others. The humans taught me that there is a difference between being hard and being strong, he would say. Being hard means you feel nothing. Being strong means you feel everything and fight anyway. 6 months later, Zektar received a new assignment. He was put in command of a mixed force of human and Vorthak soldiers. Some of his fellow Vorthak officers wondered if he could still be an effective commander after learning so much from the humans. The answer came during the Battle of Kepler 438b, where Zektar's combined force defeated a hive army twice their size. They won not through superior firepower, but through superior cooperation. Human soldiers fought alongside Vorthak warriors, each species learning from the other's strengths. After the victory, a young human soldier approached Zektar. "Sir, I heard that you used to think humans were weak. What changed your mind?" Zektar looked at the young man and thought about everything he had learned.